study today a very, very challenging passage, very difficult passage, which is in some ways very relevant passage. A passage about how do we defend ourselves? When is it okay? What's the limits? Passage about revenge, vengeance. It's, of course, hard to read this passage without thinking about the events on October 7th, where Jewish women were kidnapped and taken hostage. That seems to be what happens in this week's portion. Look at chapter 34, verse 1. It's the story of Dina. She is the daughter of Jacob and Leah, and she is captured. First, she is assaulted sexually. In those days, a woman had, certainly at that age, was not able to give consent. So she was basically taken by Shechem and Hamor's father, and then she was held, and there were negotiations over her. And the sons of Jacob did not allow that to continue, and instead they massacred the whole city. Jacob's reaction to this is one of fear. And this is the story, and the text just like leaves that there. It doesn't tell us how we're supposed to feel about any of this. Are we supposed to be, text is not explicit. Are we supposed to be admiring the actions of Jacob's sons or disappointed in them? Are we supposed to view them as heroes or villains? So I want to turn now to chapter 34 and read this verse together carefully and slowly and go through the passage together. There's two entirely different ways to read this. You could read this passage as praising Jacob or as deeply, strongly critical of Jacob. This is the story. And so we'll read it together. We'll see how far we'll get through here. And then we'll think about it. We'll think about it. So chapter 34, verse 1. Vatetse Dina bas Leah, asher yaldel Yaakov, v'ra'ot bivnot haaretz. So Dina, the daughter of Leah, who was born to Jacob, went out to sea from the daughters of the land. Rashi tells us, why is she called the daughter of Leah and not the daughter of Jacob? Rashi says, because it's telling us that there's something negative about her, because she was, Vatetzi means to go out. It also says about Leah that she went out to greet her husband and said, I have hired you to be with me for the night. And that was like a vulgar way of interacting, or vulgar might be too strong, a immodest way. And so Rashi says, like mother, like daughter, that she was a yatzanit. She was a woman, a girl who was going out. And that's the implication of this Rashi is troubling because it's implying that whatever happened to Dina was because she was irresponsible with her own actions, which of course today we would call blaming the victim. I wouldn't be so happy about that, but that's the tone that Rashi is setting at the beginning. We'll take a different approach in just a moment from the Baal Turim, but first I wanted to say that there are other midrashim which take a different approach. The Torah Tamima cites the cite other midrashim that say that it wasn't her fault, that Shechem stood outside her window and played music, and basically, he threw a concert, and that caused her to go outside of her um, of her house and to go out. So he kind of seduced her into coming out, like putting candy in front of a baby. And in that context, the text never states how old Dina is exactly. But in Masechet Sofrim, one of the so-called minor tractates, it states that Dina was 6 years old at this time. And we see we're talking about a little child who is not capable of consenting. And of course, if we took the earlier passage with Rebecca as a template, there you had to ask the permission of the father and the brother and the mother and also the girl. And that's the way Isaac was able to get a wife. Not first you sleep with her, and then after you keep her kidnapped in your home, which is what he was doing here, then he opens up the conversation with her. So there is that concern. Want to just state that the Baal Turim takes a different approach. He also blames. He doesn't necessarily blame Dina, but he blames Yaakov for what happened to Dina, and not for reasons we necessarily would think. It says in the verse, Bivnos. It says, and Dina went out, Lerot Bivnota Aretz, to see from the daughters of the land. So this word Bivnot appears only 2 times in the Bible, in the entire Bible, says the Baal Turim. Where is the second time? That's respecting Samson, as Samson's parents were upset that he wanted to take a wife from the Philistines. And Samson's parents said to him, Ha'ein bivnot achecha isha? Is there no girl amongst your brothers who you could take for a wife? So there, bivnot is basically saying, Samson, why are you not taking one of the daughters of your own people? Why are you going to the Philistines? So what's the upshot of this? So the upshot of this is, because Jacob did not, and this is what Rashi says, this is what the Baal Turim says, because Jacob did not want to give to his brother from his daughter. He didn't eat that. Initially, what happened was Esav, the Midrash says, had wanted to marry Dina. He'd wanted to marry her, and Jacob did not allow it. He kept her hidden in a chest so that Esav would not see her. So just like the verse, the other time the word bivnot appears, it says you should have taken one of these girls from your brother, meaning to say Yaakov should have let Dina marry Esav. And because he refused to do that, he hid her in a chest so that Esav would not see her. Therefore, he was punished, Sheyatza l'ro bivnot ha'aretz, that she went out to see from the daughters of the land, and she became mixed up with Shem. So basically, the idea is that Jacob was punished, that Dinah was assaulted and kidnapped because he kept her in a box. He had kept her hidden away from Esav, and Rashi explains that even though Jacob had wanted to protect his daughter, actually, if she had married Esav, he would have repented and become a better person. But the upshot of all this is that Jacob thought he was protecting his daughter by keeping her hidden away in a chest, in a box. But really, what he was actually doing was exposing her to even more danger, and that's something that's so. Therefore, the Baal HaTurim is saying that if Rashi says that the blame for this lies with Dina's actions, Dina's irresponsible actions of going out, and then the Torah Tamima cites the Midrash that says no, she was seduced into going out. The Baal HaTurim is saying no, the actions were with Jacob. He kept her too isolated, and that caused her to go out in the wrong way when he should have had already dedicated her to Esav. Then we wouldn't have had this problem. So these are the three theories at the outset as to what precipitated these actions. So then it goes to verse 2. Vayarusa Shlem ben Chamor achivi nistia aretz vayikach ota vayishkav osa vayanea. And so Shlem, the son of Chamor, the Chivite, who was the prince of the land, meaning to say, he thinks he's entitled to everything. He's the president, and he takes her. Vayishkav ota, he lies with her. Vayanea, and now the word vayanea can mean under certain circumstances in the biblical text, it can mean that he sexually assaulted her. But that's not what it means here, according to Rashi. According to Rashi, specifically does not give that reading, which would have actually been the typical reading at the text. But he does not give that reading. Instead, it says, Rashi says that it means that he had intercourse with her in what's called the typical manner and also the atypical manner. So therefore, that's what Rashi says it means. Why doesn't Rashi say that this means what it usually means throughout the Tanakh, which is that she was forced to have intercourse with him? He does not take that approach here. What's the reason why Rashi does not take that approach? So the Torah Tamima says that the reason is because as follows, because it says in the Midrash that it says at the end of the passage in verse 27, it says, in verse 27 here, it says, and they plundered, it says they plundered the city. And then after that, it says, excuse me, in verse 26, it says that they came upon the town, they killed everybody. They took Dina from the house of Shem, and then they went out. They took Dina from the house of Shem, and then they went out. So Rashi says the word Vayetzeu, then they went out. So the Midrash tells us there, Gorin Baviyotzin. They had to drag her out kicking. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to leave. She did not willingly leave the house of Shem. So therefore, according to this reading of Rashi and the Midrash, Dina was not forced against her will, but she was a willing accomplice or willing participant in this behavior. But of course, the question is she capable of giving consent? She's too young. She didn't, in those days, they didn't think that the girls had agency. But clearly Rashi does not adopt the approach that this was done against her will. And that's a very, very important, in some ways, a forced reading of the text, but it's based upon the fact that the Midrash says she didn't want to leave, because when they go to her at the end, it says they had to take her. They had to take her out. She didn't want to leave on her own, which implies that she was kind of happy there. She didn't want to leave on her own. That's what the text is implying. So that's the reason why Rashi doesn't want to adopt, perhaps as the Torah, that's why he doesn't want to adopt that approach. Anyway, so then the next verse says, "Vatidbak nafsho bedina bat Yaakov." So his soul cleaved to Dina, the daughter of Jacob. Vayahav et hanara, and he loved her. So Shlem's soul cleaved to her, and he loved her. Vayidaber alev hanara, and he spoke to her heart. Vayomer Shlem al Chamor aviv lemor, and Shlem said to Chamor's father, saying, "Take for me this girl as a wife." Kachli et hayalda zot leisha. Now this is you have to bear in mind, this was not necessary because Shechem was the Nesi'aretz. He was the prince of the land. He was the president. He owned the land. He didn't have to marry her. He could have just kept her as his concubine. He could have kept her and abused her. He was not required to marry her, but yet he decided that he wanted to do that. He wanted to almost elevate her. The Yaakov Shama, verse 5. Jacob heard this, Kitimeis Dina Bito, that they had defiled Dina, his daughter. Uvanav hayu miknei ubasadeh, and his children were with his cattle in the field. Mecharish Yaakov ad boam, and Jacob was silent until they came. Very important question. Why here does it call Dina Jacob's daughter, whereas earlier it calls Dina Leah's daughter? Why here all of a sudden are we being told that she was Jacob's daughter? We already know she's the daughter of Leah, which means she's the daughter of Jacob. So why doesn't it say Jacob heard that they had defiled Dina? Why does it again say his daughter? Why does it again say his daughter? So the answer is based upon what appears at the end of the verse, that Jacob was silent. He heard that they had defiled his daughter, and he was silent. He did not cry out. He did not express any emotion. He did not express outrage. He does not say terrible. He does not rush off into battle. His own daughter has been defiled, and what does Jacob do? Absolutely nothing. He's totally silent. Totally silent. And this indeed is going to be the great question about Jacob in this chapter. This man who so bravely wrestled with the angels, was so bravely willing to take on Esav, this man who was not afraid of Lavan, this man who was not afraid of Esav. All of a sudden, his daughter is attacked, and the same man who stood up for himself, when it comes to his own daughter, his actions, he seems neutered. He's unable to, he doesn't say anything whatsoever. He's silent, he's passive, doesn't express outrage. All of a sudden, what happened to the Jacob we knew? What happened to the Jacob we knew? And that's one of the great questions about this chapter. So I saw, just jumping ahead a little bit, I saw a justification of Jacob's lack of speech here and his seeming passivity here from the Maggid of Dubna. The Maggid of Dubna comments on the verse that we're going to get to. It says that Jacob's, in chapter 34, verse 13, that the children of Jacob answered Shem and Hamor, his father, with mirma, with craftiness, and they spoke to him, knowing that he had defiled Dina, their sister. So the question is, says the Maggid of Dubna, why were the brothers speaking and not the father? Maggid of Dubna asked this question. We're coming it from the approach of, Jacob was being passive for whatever reason. So the Maggid of Dubna wants to give an explanation for the passivity, but also really For why it seems like the brothers were speaking out of turn. We know that if their father is there, you're supposed to let your father speak. Now, brothers shouldn't speak in the presence of their father. They shouldn't be taking control. So the Maggid of Dubna says that this was an example of good leadership on the part of Jacob and good education. Meaning, typically speaking, the father should go first, and after him, the children. But sometimes it's honorable for the father that the children will go first. When is it more honorable for the father that the children go first? When they're walking into like a mud. Let's say they're going into a field of mud. Even though typically a child should let their father the father should go before the child. But if they're walking into a muddy field, then it's not going to be respectful to allow the father to go first. That's just like a clear example of that. And so really that's what's going on here, because the matter that the children of Jacob thought the way to deal with this situation was not in a straight path. And so therefore, since they had to deal with it with deceit, with craftiness, they had to go to war, the father shouldn't have been the one to do this. The father had to almost like take a step back and let the children speak. And that's why he allowed the children to have this conversation here and not him. Almost like he shouldn't have been the one to say it. So that's kind of a defense of Jacob's actions, that he needed to keep his image and let his children do it. But to me, that seems like that's a forced reading. That's a charitable reading of Jacob. That's not necessarily supported by the text, because it doesn't say Jacob was even upset. The Maggid of Dubna's explanation would be more persuasive to me if it had said that Jacob was upset. It never actually says that Jacob was upset. So then it says in verse 7, and the sons of Jacob came back from the field. So when the sons of Jacob came back from the field when they heard this. So right away, Jacob does nothing. Jacob heard, no reaction, does not send for his children, does not express outrage. He's just silent. The sons of Jacob, when they heard, they came back. They left work. And then Vayitatzu Anashim, they were very upset. I'm going to say something more in one moment. And they were sad. Vayichar lahem ma'od. So they were sad. They were angry very much. Keeps pointing out how upset they are. They came back. They're sad. They're upset very much. 4 ways of showing this. And that as if we don't get it, because a nivala, a desecration, had been done in Israel to sleep with the daughter of Jacob. Jacob again, his daughter. V'chein lo ye'aseh. This should not be done. The text is saying how upset they are. The sons are furious, livid, whereas Jacob has done nothing. He's done nothing. And I'll say there's a midrash that we were studying yesterday in the yeshiva, and Binyamin raised this midrash that points out, by he says, guess how long Jacob was silent for? The text doesn't tell us. Text makes it sound like, Jacob was silent for 2 minutes, and then the sons came in from the field. No, that's not what went on, because the field was far away. What do you mean they heard? So how long? According to the midrash, Jacob was silent for 18 months. 18 months. He did nothing. The midrash, now whether or not that's literal, clearly we don't have to take it literally, but the point of it is the midrash is saying there's something very off with Jacob's actions. He wasn't just silent for an afternoon, let cooler heads prevail, and then I'll come back with, think about how to do this. He just allowed it to happen. He allowed his daughter to remain kidnapped in the tent of Shechem, and he did absolutely nothing. He didn't send for his children. He didn't express outrage. He didn't express upset. And it was the whole time a desecration, a disgrace. And the whole time she was sitting there in the tent of Shechem. So there's the text really does seem to paint a very, very concerning or disturbing picture of Jacob's actions. So then it states in verse 8, and Rashi points out this is not done. It doesn't say, it first says a desecration was done in Israel, and then it says, and this is not done. Rashi's saying this is not done anywhere. Meaning to say this behavior to take and molest the unmarried girls without permission, meaning to say to just take them, that's never done, even amongst the nations of the world. Even the nations of the world did not do this. So the actions here of Shechem are completely egregious. That's what Rashi is pointing out. They're egregious actions. So it says in verse 8, so Hamor spoke with them, saying, Shechem, b'ni chashka nafsho bebetchem, my son Shechem desired your daughter. Tenuna osa lo isha. Give her to him to be a wife. V'itchatnu osanu, marry us amongst your daughters. Bivnosechem titeng lanu. He says, marry us amongst your daughters. And our daughters you shall take for yourselves. V'itanu teishevu, and you shall dwell with us. The land will be before you. Shavus ruah ve'achazuba. He said, basically, Hamor spoke to them saying, I have a perfect solution. I have the perfect solution. Basically, let me marry your daughter, Dina. You'll give us your daughters. Your daughters you'll give to us, and our daughters will give to you. We'll all live together. The land will be before you. You'll be able to dwell here, do business, and you'll settle in the land. It's the perfect solution. There's plenty of land to go around. We can have a peace treaty. We'll marry in with each other. It'll be kumbaya. Kumbaya. We'll have the peace pipe together. It'll be a beautiful moment. This is a watershed moment in human history. Dina can bring these two tribes together, the Canaanites and the Israelites. How beautiful it is. That's their proposal. Who could argue with that? We're going to give Shlem the Nobel Peace Prize. The Shlem is going to get the Nobel Peace Prize for his beautiful offer. There's only two problems with that. Two problems with this. First, he's negotiating, and the whole time, this poor Dina is kidnapped by him in the house. And so everything he says is disingenuous when he's having this conversation while he's holding her hostage, literally. That's the first thing. And then the second problem is, we'll see the second problem in a few moments in the text, and you'll see what's so dangerous about what he said. Yomer Shlem el Avia, Shlem said to his father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes. Whatever you say to me, I'll do. And he said, verse 12, Arbu alai ma'od moar matan ve'na. Says, give me a very big bridal price. You want me to have to pay a huge bridal price? I'll give it. Whatever you say to me, just give me Tanuya Tanaro Isha. Give me this girl as a wife. So Vayanu b'nei Yaakov et Shlem, verse 13. The sons of Jacob answered Shlem and Hamor's father, b'mirma. Now, I don't know how your Chumash translates it. It's usually translated as deceit, but Rashi's not having that here. Rashi is not accepting that translation. He says it means with wisdom. It means with wisdom. It says not giving yourself, he's not giving in to these people was not deceit, it was wisdom. You have to speak to a devil in a fox-like manner. So, and they spoke, and the verse says it clearly, because they had defiled Dina, their sister. Veidaberu asher timei es Dina achosam, because they had defiled Dina, their sister. Vayomru eleim, and they said to them, Lo nuchal asota devar. We said, we can't do this. We can't let Dina marry you. Et achoteno ish asher lo orla. We can't let our sister marry anybody who's circumcised. Ki cherpa hi lanu. It's a disgrace for us. Because it's a disgrace for us to allow our sister to be married to anybody who's circumcised, who's not circumcised. So therefore they say, Ach bezoneo lachem. But this will be pleasing for you if you will be like us. Mimolachem kol zachar. If you will be like us and circumcise every male. The Hasidim, the Rebbe say no. These are actually two separate things. If you will circumcise, but that's not enough to be like us. But you also have to be like us in addition to circumcising. So even there, they didn't say, the Shem people didn't fulfill it. They said you have to do both things. You have to be like us. But how are you going to be like the sons of Jacob? These people were rapists. They were kidnappers. So it was an impossibility. And we'll give our daughters to you. And your daughters we will take for ourselves. And we will live with you. And then we'll be like one nation. So we see from here, from the beginning, they said, yeah, it's possible. But then they said, verse 17, this shows us what's going on here. If you don't listen to us to circumcise, we will take our daughter and we will go. And what does that mean? It means this whole time Dina is still with Shem. They don't have her. This wasn't a normal, typical negotiation where we're saying, oh, let's get married. Let's have the two parties together to get married. No, this is not being done like that at all. They've kidnapped her. And brothers, and it must have sounded like an empty threat at that point where they said, if you don't give her to us, if you don't do this, then we'll take her. And they're thinking to themselves, how are you going to take us? Because as we'll see, she was actually in the center of the city. So it was not simple to get her. She was basically being held in a secure location. But now look what happens. And the words were good in the eyes of Chamor, and the eyes of Shem ben Chamor. And he did not delay to do it. He desired the daughter of Jacob. And he was the most honorable person from his father's home. So they came back. They had to sell this to the people of their town. And they spoke to the people of their town saying, and this is why I said, there are two problems with what Shem said. Number one, he had her kidnapped the whole time. And this is the second time. He said, these people want to make peace with us. They want to live in the land. And they want to do business. And the land is plenty big before them. We'll take their daughters. They reversed it, by the way. When Shlomo was speaking, he said, we'll give you our daughters and we'll take your daughters. When we spoke to his own people, he said, we'll take their daughters and we'll give them our daughters. He reversed it to make it more favorable to himself. He says, this is all they require for them to live with us. All the men have to circumcise. But then he says, verse 23. This is the verse that reveals everything to my mind. Mikneim v'kinyanam v'chol be'emtam. Their cattle, everything they own, all their animals. Halo lonuhem. They're ours. Ach neotah lahem Just you have to do this for them. So this is where Shlem revealed that everything, this was all a plot. Jacob's sons were not the only ones who were plotting here about how to get the upper hand in this high stakes encounter. Shlem himself said, "We're going to get everything. Just be nice to them. Pretend to do this, and then everything they own will swallow them up and absorb them. We're going to have a merger, and all their animal and cattle are going to be ours. We're going to get everything. This is our plot to get everything." So just like Jacob's sons answered with mirma, which is wisdom or deception, also Shechem, you see, he's speaking to his people in his town hall meeting. He's like, yeah, go through the circumcision, but don't worry, because when it's done, we're going to have everything. We're going to be so much richer. And they want to make peace, but he doesn't say that we're going to make peace. We're going to absorb them. It was a unilateral relationship. That's what was so dangerous. This is why Shechem is not a sympathetic figure to my mind, because first of all, he's a kidnapper. He kept Dina hostage. He definitely took advantage of her because she was not capable of giving consent. But also, he was speaking out of two sides of his mouth, one to Jacob's sons and the other to his people. And to his people, he made clear what his intent was. His intent was to take everything that belonged to Jacob and to his children. Verse 24, Vayishmeu El Chamor Vel Shlem Beno, Kol Yotei Shariro. And they listened to Chamor and Shlem his son. All the people went out from the city. And they circumcised all the males, Kol Yotei Shariro. So it was on the third day. So the third day I don't know if it's true in current medicine, but in biblical times, the third day is considered to be the worst day after the circumcision. And the Talmud says that on the third day, that's why you have to wash the babies, because they're considered to be in pain. And so they were in pain.
Also,
say something?
Yeah. Also on the third day is when the strangers or the angels visited Abraham.
Yeah, exactly right. Rashi says there that it was the third day because the third day after the circumcision is the most difficult. And so that's I think the source for that Rashi is this pasuk. And the source for the Talmudic text is because it's the third day is where they're the weakest. So it was the third day, and Vayikhu Shnei Bnei Yaakov, Shimon and Levi, Achei Dina. And the two sons of Jacob, Shimon and Levi, the brothers of Dina, each took his sword, Vayavo el Ha'ir Betach, and they came to the city with strength, Vayargu Kol Zachar, and they killed all the males. So what does this mean? What's interesting here is, why are they called the brothers of Dina? Obviously, we know they're the brothers of Dina. So the Rashi says, because they gave of themselves for her. They dedicated themselves. That's why they're called the brothers. Meaning to say, they demonstrated zealousness. How old were Shimon and Levi? It seems that they were, that year, the Gemara in Nazir says that's the year that they just turned 13. They just become bar mitzvah. And they were doing their first mitzvah. What was their first mitzvah? Pidyon Shvuyim, of redeeming the captives. So, Ishcharbo. And the Mayana Shal Torah, in the name of the Ger Rebbe, says that according to calculation based upon the Gemara, that was the age where they just become 13, and the custom was that when you turn 13, you have to give a drasha. You have to give a drash. So it says the Ger Rebbe, this was their drasha. They said they lived with their actions. They said, we have to save our sister. And he said, we have to save our sister. And he said that they made an exposition that circumcision is called a sign, an oath. And so therefore, since they weren't really sincere, they were trying to pass themselves, the people of Shem were trying to pass themselves off as being sincere, and they were basically bearing false witness. So Shimon and Levi, they stepped up. And what did they do? They took Dina from the house of Shem. They took Dina from the house of Shem. And I already cited the Midrash that says that they had to take her out forcefully at this verse, that she didn't want to go. So that adds another layer of complexity here. And so Bnei, verse 27, Bnei Yaakov, the sons of Jacob came on the carcasses and they plundered the city that had defiled their sister. So we see two things here. First of all, it's not appropriate to look at all the sons of Jacob as one and to paint them with a broad stroke. Because Shimon and Levi, they just saved their sister. They went and they killed the city in order to take out their sister. So that might have been justifiable. They had to rescue her. But the sons of Jacob, the remaining brothers, they weren't there to rescue the sister. They were just there to get the money afterwards, to plunder the city. Yet it's so ironic that when Jacob comes to the end of his life and he gives final words, he curses Shimon and Levi for their actions. Whereas they're the ones who seem pure here. The other brothers are the ones who just came in for the money. So the other point to point out from this text is it says in the text, Asher Timu Achusam. The whole city was involved in the defilement of their sister. The whole city was involved in defilement of their sin. And not only that, they plundered the city and their sheep and their cattle and their donkeys and everything that was in the city and the field they took. But kol chelam and all of their wealth and all of their children, their babies, they took them captive and everything in their house. Hold on one second, we have a question. The verse says, Vayomer Yaakov al Shimon ben Levi. This is such a sad verse. This is, to my mind, these two verses are just filled with ambiguity. Yaakov says to Shimon and Levi, Achartem oti. And this is the word achartem, like the most charged word. When I think Elijah called Yeravam Ocher Yisrael. Yeravam called Elijah the Ocher Yisrael. You're a thorn of Israel. You've embarrassed me. You've desecrated me. Vayishlach, to embarrass me amongst the people of the land. The Canaanites and the Perizzites. And I'm few in number. And they're going to gather against me. And they'll kill me. And they'll kill I and my household. Jacob is saying, it says, you've embarrassed me amongst the Canaanites. I'm not going to be able to be invited to the Canaanites' annual dinner. I'm going to be ostracized. That's a little bit harsh because he says, but they're going to gather against me and destroy me and my household. The verses can read it as saying Jacob is concerned for the safety, that their actions were reckless, endangered everybody, but can also read it as, why are you so concerned about himself? You've endangered me. What about Dina? And then the brothers respond, Vayomru, and they said, so Jacob's only talking to Shimon and Levi, and they said, Hakazona yaset achoteni. Should our sister be treated like a harlot? And the text leaves it like that. The text doesn't tell us who's right. But typically, whoever has the last word is right. But Jacob seems to have the last word because later on, he curses Shimon and Levi. But this is very, very difficult text. You have to really spend a lot of time on it. It's ambiguous. But to my mind, it's very critical of Yaakov. It's like a turning point. And maybe you could say that this is a radical statement. So if I wasn't afraid of saying something irreverent, I would say that Jacob's lack of being upset, lack of taking charge when his daughter is kidnapped and assaulted, maybe sets the tone that other people are not going to be, that the brothers see, oh, you can take one of our father's children, kidnap him, and keep him hostage, and nothing's going to happen to you. And maybe that's why they thought they could get away with doing what they did to Joseph. So Jacob was silent when Leah's daughter was taken hostage. In the end, will be silent when his favorite son is taken hostage. And maybe it's his own fault for not speaking up forcefully. Anyway, that's something to think about. And we have a comment here, and then we'll stop. Yeah, of course.
Actually, a question.